The Republic of France, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, what do they have in common? In these two countries, certain politicians are considering introducing or promoting US-style taxation, citizenship-based taxation. So as a European, should you be worried? Should you consider renouncing your citizenship? That's today's topic. Hello everyone, this is Javier Correa, Research and Development Associate here at Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs go where they're treated best. And you know, here at Nomad Capitalist, we always have to distinguish right away whether a client is a US person for tax purposes or whether a client is a non-US person for tax purposes. And the reason is, as you may imagine, that the United States is effectively, as you may already know, the only country that taxes its citizens wherever they are located in the world, meaning that Americans, wherever they relocate, always have to consider what are the implications of their US citizenship and their US tax liabilities, even if they do not spend one single day in the United States for an entire year, or for 20 years, or for 50 years for that matter. As long as they have US citizenship, they will be liable for US tax and they will be under the scope of US regulations. Now, up to this point, this has been truly an American issue. Only US citizens have to worry about this issue. Europeans, Canadians, up to now, as long as the tax non-residence procedures are followed properly and that all departure mechanisms are followed as they should be, they can just simply relocate to another country and optimize their taxes that way without having to give up their citizenship and without having to renounce to having a great Tier A travel document. Now, when things start getting a bit complicated and where things start really worrying our European clients is when you have politicians in France or in the Kingdom of the Netherlands saying, you know, we should adapt and we should follow the US's example and we should start taxing our citizens wherever they are in the world. And often the example of Monaco comes in. In the case of Monaco, really, unless you are a French citizen who was born in Monaco and lived in Monaco for his entire life, or unless you are, at this point, I guess, pretty old in your golden years and you relocated to Monaco really back in the 1940s, you are unable to take advantage of the tax incentives in Monaco. There's another great video we did on that. You should check that one out. So a lot of the French politicians, especially on the left, are saying, listen, we want to consider this alternative. And now this isn't only a problem of the left. If you recall back in 2012, for example, then presidential candidate Nicolas Sarkozy, who is very much on the right, was saying that at least to some extent, France should charge some kind of citizenship-based contribution or taxation on wealthy French citizens that have relocated overseas. So what is the situation as of now, and should a French or Dutch or German or Swiss or Spaniard consider renouncing their citizenships as many US citizens do? And the answer that I'm going to give you might surprise you, but the answer as of now is no. And the main reason is tax treaties. Yes, tax treaties. It might seem a bit odd, but tax treaties are actually one of the best weapons that Europeans and Canadians have if their country were to somehow introduce some kind of citizenship-based taxation. Let me explain why. When a country negotiates a tax treaty, usually, as of now I haven't found any counterexample in international law, those tax treaties would supersede national law, meaning that those agreements between countries have a higher hierarchy in terms of applicable law than the internal tax laws of each individual country. So in a country like the United States, where citizenship-based taxation has been the norm essentially for over a century at this point, all tax treaties are carefully drafted and written in such a way that the United States is always able to tax its citizens, regardless of the fact that that US citizen lives in a country that has a tax treaty with the US. So for example, if you're a US citizen and you live in the UK and you read the tax treaty, you'll see that the US reserves the right to tax you based on your citizenship, regardless of the fact that you live in the UK. So this is how, even though the US has a very well-developed and ample network of tax treaties, US citizens can't really take advantage of these treaties. Now, in the case of European countries, remember, they have only started contemplating or even debating the idea of potentially introducing some kind of citizenship-based taxation. So all of the treaties they have are carefully drafted to take into consideration the person's residence, not the person's nationality. Meaning that even if, let's say, the left is re-elected in France and they get not a relative majority but a super majority in the National Assembly, and they gain a majority in the Senate and they win the presidency and they win everything. Let's say that it's a landslide election, it's the left all around, and they change the internal laws of France. They cannot unilaterally change all of the tax agreements France has entered into. Meaning that if you're French and you relocate to a country that has a tax treaty with France, even if local laws in France dictate that citizens should be taxed wherever they are, you can always use the treaty as a shield and say, well, but I live in Malta, but I live in Ireland, but I live in Switzerland, and there is a tax treaty, and according to that treaty, you cannot tax me if I am deemed a resident, usually under Article 4 or 5 of that treaty, in the foreign country. So if France or the Netherlands or the UK were to introduce some kind of US-style citizenship-based taxation, the network of tax treaties they have so far basically built would be the best line of defense that you would have as an expat. Obviously, is renouncing a possibility? Sure, because if these measures were to be introduced, obviously if you wanted to relocate to a place like, let's say, the Cayman Islands, that usually has tax treaties with no one, then, you might find yourself in a sticky situation whereby, as a French citizen in 2035, potentially you might not be able to relocate to the Cayman Islands to save tax. But if you can still relocate to a Malta, if you can relocate to a Switzerland and benefit from their lump sum tax regime, if you can relocate to an Italy and do the same, then is it really worth it giving up a great passport? I don't really think so. I think you will still have options as a European, being able to carefully navigate these waters and go for these countries that have special either lump sum or non-domicile or special expat tax regimes. And this brings me back to a broader point. We are heading towards an era where the traditional tax haven is going to die out. They simply do not have the equipment, the tools, and the mindset to survive in the 21st century. Whereas the onshore, offshore hybrid, like the Maltas, like the Switzerlands, like the Italys, those are the places that are going to survive, and those are the places where you might want to consider relocating to in order to really take full advantage of tax optimization and international corporate structures in the years to come. Now, that being said, I always think you need a plan B. I think having multiple passports is always very useful. We've seen how in certain countries political instability has reduced the value of certain passports. We've seen how in other countries, for example, if you have an issue with a tax authority, your passport might be confiscated or might be canceled while that issue with the tax authority is resolved. And I definitely think that even though you have this option of shielding yourself through the tax treaty networks, Europeans should now more than ever consider having second citizenship, whether it is in another European country, because definitely there are different tendencies there. Whereas France and the Netherlands are potentially moving closer towards citizenship-based taxation, you have countries that are very much against that. For example, the Maltas and the Switzerlands, the Irelands, I don't see them introducing anything nearly as aggressive as a citizenship-based taxation at this point. You also have to take into consideration that in some cases, for example, and this is very clear in the example of the Netherlands, they are openly talking about maybe going after you. Maybe they're saying, okay, we won't go as far as citizenship-based taxation, but if you relocate to a country that we don't really like, we're still going to tax you as if you were a resident for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Countries like Mexico already do that. I think it's definitely worth considering having that second passport, which gives you more freedom, gives you the ability to not depend on one single country or depend on one single citizenship. And hey, guess what? Let's say not in 2035, but let's say in 2065, by the time your grandkids are discussing all these issues, let's say France or the Netherlands have been able to renegotiate all of their tax treaties to, have the same wording as the US does, then your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren will have the possibility to essentially renounce the citizenship if they so want to, and they'll have the option to remain citizens of countries that treat them better, countries that treat their wealth better. So having more options is always positive, and this is why here at Nomad Capitalist, we always talk about second, third, fourth passports. We talk about the onshore, offshore hybrids. We talk about the nuance of maybe looking at countries that seem like they're high tax, but when you look closely enough, you find a special regime, you find a special financial deal, and that's our specialty. So if you want to learn more about all the options you have as an American, as a European, if you're concerned about those nasty politicians in the Netherlands or in France now, or if you think that your grandchildren might have to potentially be concerned with what politicians are talking about in these countries, then definitely go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next video.